Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are going to be going over the history and geography of Israel. Now, disclaimers before we start, because if you know anything about the history of this country, you know that it's very, well, it's a lot, let's just say. But first of all, don't forget that I started an Instagram for this channel. It has really fun behind the scenes things on it, so check that out if you're so inclined. And yeah, normally I would say like the usual, don't forget to subscribe, blah blah blah, those wonderful things, but I have been rehearsing this video for the past hour or so, maybe 2 now. I've been working on this script for 3 days now. I'm exhausted. This has been a hard one to do. So let me just say outright that this channel is about 3 things, right? It's about relaxing you through ASMR. It's about education and teaching you about the world and the cultures of the world. And it's also about world peace. So I will not tolerate any kind of negativity in the comments toward Israelis or Palestinians. Please do not dislike this video because of the topic. You are the one that clicked on it. I am going to be presenting this information in a very factual manner. If all goes well, you won't hear any of my opinions. Let's hope I don't start ranting. If I do, I'll probably just edit it out. But yeah, you won't hear what I think. I guess if you want to know what I think, I believe in peace. I'm very nonviolent. I see where both sides of the conflict are coming from. I see where both sides of the conflict have done wrong. I feel for the people who live in this mess, I should say, but do I have solutions? No, I don't. So that's where I'm at. So yeah, basically just don't leave hate because of the topic. If you want to leave hate because of the video quality, sound quality, if you want to dislike this video because of my voice or presentation or something, feel free to do so, but please do not dislike this video because of the topic. Do not leave hateful comments on this video toward anyone involved in this country's history. And most importantly, I will under no circumstance tolerate any kind of Holocaust denial or any kind of genocide denial whatsoever. If I see it, it's getting deleted. If you try to post again, you're blocked. That's just all there is to it. So, with that in mind, let's relax as I take you through the geography of Israel. And I should say, before there's any kind of other hate, that in my country series, I am going to do Palestine. So don't worry, it's fine. We'll talk about Palestine later. It'll get its own series. Don't worry. So today is about Israel. So let me get my pencil. Now that I've got the nastiness out of the way, let's talk about geography, one of my favorite topics. Israel's a very diverse region in terms of like the land. I'm so nervous, you guys. Up here along the coast, we have the more fertile farmland of the area, and the coast meaning the Mediterranean coast right here. Up here we have more of the mountains known as the Judean Hills. The highest peak in Israel is up here, but it's not on this map. I have my big atlas, but that map is really huge and gives almost too many details, but this one doesn't give enough. So the tallest mountain is Mount Meron, and Mount Carmel is down hereabouts. And then on this side of the mountains we have the Jordan Rift Valley, where the Jordan River is located. The Jordan River flows between 2 different lakes. This one is Lake Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee. It goes by a lot of different names, and it flows down to the Dead Sea, which is what I think is the most interesting geographic point of Israel. The Dead Sea is the lowest spot on Earth, and it is incredibly salty. It's called the Dead Sea because nothing can survive in it. There's no fish, no plants, just salt water. It's the saltiest body of water on Earth. So salty that humans float in it. It's apparently nearly impossible to dunk your head under the water. It's so buoyant. Yeah, I think that's cool. It's a place I want to go someday. I want to float on the water. Moving down this way, we have the Negev Desert, which is a very big deserty desert. A lot of the land, mostly around here, has been turned into farmland through some very clever irrigation tactics. And it's very rocky, mountainous over here. And then down here we have the Gulf of Aqaba, the Red Sea. You can't see that. That is in frame, right? You can just barely see it there. That's the Red Sea. Let's move up this way to talk about some of the cities. Well, we have Eilat down there, which is a big port city. Speaking of port cities, we have Haifa up here, the largest port city, and second most populous city. The most populous is Tel Aviv right here, which we'll talk about in its history. Now, here's a question, because you see here it says Tel Aviv Yafo, right? So I've seen it as Yafo and Yafa. I think one is the Hebrew pronunciation and one is the Arabic, but I've also seen it spelled with a J, and I've been told that that's pronounced Jaffa, which is like the American English pronunciation, but does anyone actually say that? Just curious, because it's spelled like 3 different ways, almost 4 different ways, I think. Somewhere else I saw. But Tel Aviv, for the sake of this video, is the most populated city in Israel. But the most important by far would be Jerusalem. Where to start with Jerusalem? It's a very ancient old city, and it is a very holy city for 3 of the world's biggest religions. It is the place where it's believed that Jesus Christ was crucified and buried. It's believed to be the place where Muhammad descended to heaven, and it's where the Jewish temples were built, destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed yet again, where only the western wall of the temple is remaining, and it is like by far the most sacred site of the Jewish religion, and also extremely sacred, to the Christians and Muslims as well. It's also, you can see right here on the corner of this dotted line, so it's time to talk about that. This area is known as the West Bank. This one down here is the Gaza Strip. And this one up here is the Golan Heights, which I've already talked about in my Syria series. So Israel's bordered very importantly by Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. Incredibly important to its history, as you'll find out later. These areas are very heavily disputed. So how it works today is that the Gaza Strip is under, it says right here, Palestinian administration. The West Bank is, how to put it lightly, it is under control of Israel. I'm just going to put it that. And the Golan Heights here, like I said in my Syria video, technically belongs to Syria. No one recognizes Israel's claim to this land, except Israel. Israel still administers this territory, however, and there are many Israelis living in the Golan Heights. So, with that out of the way, let's get into the history of Israel. It is very interesting. Israel's a very beautiful country, as I'll show you when we flip through this book after I go through the history. but it's just, I love peace, I love happiness, I love beauty in the world, and there's been so much bloodshed in this country throughout its entire history that it's just kind of a downer, but I'm going to do my best to educate you and relax you during this video. So, humans have been living in what is now Israel since about 1.5 million years ago. The early signs of culture happening in Israel, like people making towns and communities, would have been sometime in the 10th millennium BCE. We know that the first big one was called Canaan, which existed sometime between 1500 and 1200 BCE. And they're the ones that developed their own religion, a monotheistic religion, which would later become Judaism. The first time Israel is mentioned anywhere in history is on the Merneptah stele, which is a stele, if you don't know, is like a big piece of rock with writing on it. They didn't have books back then, It was discovered in Egypt and was made sometime around 1200 BCE. They mention this territory being known as Israel. We know that the kingdom of Israel existed sometime around 900 BCE, and the kingdom of Judah existed sometime around 700 BCE, Judah being more in the north, Israel being in the south. Israel was conquered by the Assyrians around 720 BCE, and in 586 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon captured Judah, and he destroyed the temple at Jerusalem. Cyrus the Great, who was in charge of what is now known as the Persian Empire, conquered the Babylonians, and very famously announced that the Jews would be allowed back in their home and would be allowed to practice their own religion. So they did so, and the second temple was built around 520 BCE in Jerusalem. The Persian Empire was eventually conquered by Alexander the Great, who died not long after conquering it, and his territories were divided up among his generals. The one over here was the Seleucid Empire. They were not particularly kind to the Jews in the area. Very famously, in 167 BCE was the Maccabean Revolt, which is the Hanukkah story, happens during that revolt. But anyway, over time, I'm going to skip a bunch. If you've never watched my country series before, we go fast. Eventually, the Romans conquered this area in 63 BCE, and they were far more unkind than the Seleucids were. I'm not going to get into any detail about the horrors of what the Romans did to the Jews, but there were many revolts against the Romans. The biggest revolt occurred between 66 and 73 BCE, which is when we have the story of Masada, which is about around here or so. It's not on this map. Somewhere around here. Which was a fortified city up on a big mountain that a lot of Jews fled to escape the Romans and the horrible things they were doing. When the Romans finally surrounded it and besieged it, they found that everyone inside had taken their own lives so that they would not be captured and sold as slaves to the Romans. If you want just a taste of the horribleness that the Romans did. The Romans destroyed the temple, like I said in the history, except for one wall, the only thing left standing. And they are the ones that changed the name of this region to Palestine. And they did that apparently because it sounds like Philistine, which were the ancient enemies of the Jews way before this. And this was the real start of the Jewish diaspora, which is the word for the Jewish people fleeing the area and spreading out around the world, looking for anywhere else safe to settle. Eventually, like I said, we're going fast, the Byzantine Empire took control of the territory in 628. But not long after that, the Arabs came. The Arabs conquered around, or between, I should say, 634 to 641, and they introduced Islam to the region. The Muslims taking over Jerusalem sparked the First Crusade, which happened in 1099, which is basically all of the Christians over in Europe, especially like the Christian leaders over there, thought it was very scandalous that one of their holy cities was being overrun by this new religion. So they came in and took it back and claimed it back for Christianity. Eventually, a general named Saladin, who I did a whole video on, I'll link it if I remember, came in and basically took the city back, which sparked the Second Crusade, which failed. Saladin, much like Cyrus the Great, said that the Jews would be allowed to live their lives here, and some Jews did return during this time, but not very many. In 1280, the Mamluks took over the area, which was the like Islamic kingdom, empire, something like that. That Saladin was originally from. And this is the time when they construct the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where they built a huge building over the rock that Muhammad rose to the heavens on, and built a big mosque right next to it as well. There's actually a picture down here in my atlas. Let me show you guys if I can move this without making too much noise. Ta-da. So here we can see the western wall. You can see people praying alongside it, and there's the dome on the rock, where the rock that Muhammad ascended to heaven on is inside. So there's that. Bring this back very carefully. This is the most nervous I've been since I started my ASMR channel. Oh boy, okay. So where was I? The Mamluks came, Temple Mount. And then the next group to take over would have been the Ottomans in 1516. And they stayed for quite a long time, until the end of World War One. There were many revolts against them, in particular the Palestinians revolted against the Ottomans, and also the Druze, which I mentioned in my Iran video. Yeah. Someone corrected me in the comments that I said that they were an Islamic sect, which, the Druze were inspired by Islam in the same way that, like, Christianity was inspired by Judaism. Like, they have similarities, but they're entirely different. So, I apologize for that slip up, but that was a source that I had read that I was quoting. So, I looked more into it, and that is correct, that they are not Islamic. They're their own thing. But yeah. Also, Napoleon attempted to invade the territory and was pushed back by the Ottomans, so there's that. So, now is when the ball really gets rolling. In the late 1800s, a movement started called Zionism, and it was led by a man named Theodor Herzl. It was a belief that the Jews should have their own state, and that, they should have a safe country to live in where they would not be persecuted. And it was pretty much agreed upon that it should be what was known as Palestine. The first Aliyah occurred around 1881. It basically means just like a mass migration of Jewish people to their ancient land. They came from Russia because of the persecution of the Jews in Russia at the time. Oh, and then also an interesting, in my opinion, aspect of Zionism at this time was the revival of Hebrew, which was the ancient language spoken in this territory by the Jewish people. They brought it back and made it a more common language, updated it with more modern words. The linguist in me finds that really interesting. The second Aliyah happened between 1904 to 1914. It was when the Jewish migrants were getting pretty serious about making this their safe place to live. Tel Aviv was founded in 1909 as like a big haven for the Jews. They developed something called a kibbutz, which was a little town, little community that was entirely self-sufficient. They didn't, they weren't paid for their labor. Labor was in exchange for like shelter and other goods. So, you know, the farmers paid like clothes makers and food so they get clothes exchanged like that, which are still around today and thriving and very successful. So World War I happens. Very famously, the Ottomans lose, and the British and the French divvied up the Ottoman territories, and this area came under the control of the British, which the Palestinians were not happy about. There was a big riot in 1920. In 1922, the League of Nations, which was formed after the Great War in order to, you know, keep everyone peaceful, created something called the Mandate for Palestine, which was like a pinky promise that they would create a safe state for the Jews to live in, but also a safe state for the Palestinians to live in, which, I mean, sounds nice, doesn't it? And then around this time, we have the third and the fourth Aliyahs, which happened between 1919 and 1929, with many more Jews moving into the area. The fifth was after the Nazi Germans started persecuting the Jewish. I think we all know what I mean. In the 1930s, but this led to many Arab revolts in Palestine, mostly between 1936 and 1939, because their country was very suddenly being overridden by this entire community. So those revolts resulted in what was called the White Paper of 1939, which was Britain saying that no more Jews could migrate into Palestine, which led to the deaths of countless people during the Holocaust, very sadly. But anyway, on July 22nd, 1948, a group of Zionist extremists attacked the British headquarters, which was kind of the last straw for Britain. They handed over Palestine and all those issues to the United Nations to deal with. And this is when it starts to get from bad to worse. So let me just put in one neat tidbit of history. It was in 1947 when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. I think it's like around here, so where in like this cave they found these very, very old parchments, which contained, in a nutshell, the like earliest known Bible. And it's just like a really, like they're still finding, different scrolls and artifacts around that area. It's like one pops up every like 5 to 10 years or so. So that's kind of the last bit of happy news. And again, I should preface before we enter this stage of history that this is a brief summation because it's meant to be relaxing. I feel very stressed. Let me take a moment to just like relax my muscles. You can do the same. This is not an in-depth look into the history of Israel. That may come much, much later on my channel. But as I was like writing my notes and practicing these last few days, I thought of it as like say you're given like a big puzzle and all the pieces are spread out. So I could be like, oh, this piece connects to this piece, and this piece connects to this piece, this piece connects to this piece. Or I can just tell you the pieces fit together. So this summary is my all the pieces just fit together explanation. It's not going to go super in depth. But yeah. If you want to go more in depth about certain topics without getting too hateful, you can do so in the comments. I'll welcome that. But this is just the relaxing version. So, a relaxing video about a very stressful topic. Okay, so 1947, the United Nations drew up a map of Palestine that I'll show you in this book. Gave certain areas to Palestinians, certain areas to the Israelis. The Palestinians rejected it. pretty much their mission statements, even to this day, is that they will reject any plan that isn't 100% Palestinian. So, of course, they turned it down. It led to riots, it led to civil war, and it led to May 14th, 1948, in Tel Aviv, when David Ben-Gurion announced the creation of the State of Israel. He announced their independence, which led to literally the next day, the Arab-Israeli War occurred when Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq invaded and attacked. Many other countries joined in later in the war. But it was one long, rough war, and it ended in a ceasefire. And it ended with Jordan being in control of the West Bank. And it ended with Egypt being in charge of the Gaza Strip. Let's see. Israel was admitted to the United Nations on May 11th, 1949, which resulted in a massive migration of Jews from this point on for the next couple of decades. Literally millions of Jews from all over the world moving to Israel to start a new life in a Jewish state where they would be safe. Which sounds like a great thing, but it just led to more and more disaster, honestly. Palestinian extremists emerged and would attack the Israelis, particularly in Gaza. In a nutshell, I'm going to sum up the Suez Crisis in like 1 minute. In a nutshell, Egypt blocked off the Suez Canal from Israel. Israel, along with some of its allies over in Europe, attacked Egypt and stole the Sinai Peninsula, where the Suez Canal is. The war was known as the Six-Day War. It also resulted in Israel taking over the Golan Heights from Syria, and it resulted in them taking over East Jerusalem. So you can see it's right on the border here of the West Bank. It's kind of split in half, so the Israelis took the eastern side. In 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was formed, or the PLO. They were a terrorist group that believes that, the only way to achieve their means is through violence. In particular, one of their worst attacks, I should say, was in 1972 at the Munich Olympics, where they took the Israeli athletes hostage. Okay, thank you, loud car, for stopping that sentence. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War happened, where Israel was attacked by Syria and Egypt on Yom Kippur, which is a very holy day for the Jews. It resulted in their prime minister, Golda Meir, resigning because apparently they had prior knowledge of this happening and they didn't do enough to prepare. She's the only female prime minister of Israel, by the way. Let's see. In 1977, a new party took control during the elections, the Likud party, which was more secular and right-leaning. They started peace talks with Egypt, and during the Camp David Accords in 1978, they started drafting a path for peace between Israel and Egypt. They officially signed a peace treaty in 1979, and Israel gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. Let's see. Oh, next is Lebanon. So in 1978, there was a PLO terrorist attack, which I'm not going to get into because it's horrifying. It led to Israel invading Lebanon, which I'm not going to get into because it's horrifying. I am doing every country in this series, so I think I'm just going to mention all of the struggles with Lebanon. When I do Lebanon, I think that's their story to tell, so this is just a summary. Especially since it's really depressing, so we're not going to get into the gritty details of that. A positive note was during the 1980s, there was a mass immigration from Ethiopia of the Jews living there to escape persecution. I don't know what that noise was anyway. And in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell apart, many Jews from Russia and the former Soviet Union also came to Israel, which again sounds like a great thing. You know, they're escaping persecution for a better life, but of course, more immigration of Jews into the area just leads to more tension. The first Intifada began in 1987, which was like a very violent movement from the Palestinians against the Israelis. And I'm not going to get into all the details of this. This was one of the things I just like scrapped in my script. Let's just say that there were many terrorist attacks against the Israelis. The Israelis retaliated viciously and cruelly, which led to more terrorist attacks against the Israelis, which led to the Israelis attacking back even more viciously and cruelly. Many civilians caught in between. Terrible stuff. But like I said in the beginning, you know, here I am getting personal. I understand both sides. I feel for both sides. I don't agree with both sides. I don't have a solution. Like, that's how I feel about the situation. In 1993, there was yet another step toward peace. The Oslo Accords were signed, and they gave the Palestinians more authority over governing the Gaza Strip. There was also a peace agreement signed between Israel and Jordan. But the prime minister at the time, Yitzhak Rabin, was actually assassinated by an extreme Zionist Israeli, I'm not sure, because they disagreed with the Oslo Accords. They didn't want Palestinians to govern the area. It's so messy. There was another talk for peace in 2000 at the Camp David Summit in America, but it fell apart. Ariel Sharon, who was the prime minister at the time, tried to do like a big moment of peace, and he went to the Temple Mount, which just sparked protests, which sparked retaliation against protesters, which starts, you know, it started the second Intifada, I should say. More attacks. And the Israeli government decided to stop that Intifada by building just a huge wall in Jerusalem to separate the Arab side from the Israeli side. I mean, I guess it did stop the violence. Like, the whole point was to keep suicide bombers from crossing into the area. But you can also say it's like imprisoning the Palestinians inside. Anyway, moving on. 2006 was the Second Lebanon War, which again I'll talk about when I do Lebanon. The Gaza War happened between 2008 and 2009 against Hamas, which is another Palestinian extremist movement. Basically, Hamas fired on Israel, like rockets and what have you. Israel fired back with rockets and what have you. It happened again in 2012 and 2014. Could literally happen again at any moment. It's very hair trigger over here. So that's where I'm going to leave the history. I told you it was stressful. Let's just take a moment. Man, it's such a sticky situation, and it's like, personally, I want the Jewish people to have a safe haven, and it would be great if it was in their own sacred land. But at the same time, you know, the Palestinians have been living there for thousands of years. Well over 1,000 years, I should say. But, you know, even longer than that as well. And it's just, there is like no answer. Except for world peace, honestly. That's the only answer. Let's take a look at the book. Look at this cover. Some sand art. Let's hear some page sounds. Let's relax. Oh, look at this. Gorgeous picture. Dome on the Rock. So here's Tel Aviv, which actually The white buildings, the white architecture. Tel Aviv is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. One of those weird modern architecture UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Some yummy grapes. Those are like my favorite kind of grapes, like big old green grapes. This is David Ben-Gurion announcing Israel's independence, and what's interesting is that this room is the exact same as it was on this day. It hasn't been touched or rearranged or anything. You can go see it, and it looks exactly like this, with Tator Herzl up there. Here we see a political map of Israel. Oh cool, I can show you all the sites. Like there's Masada that I was trying to find before. Let's see. Oh, here's a cool picture of the Dead Sea. Look at all the salt. It's accumulated. And here is a Jewish settlement in the Golan Heights. Here's a physical map. So now I can show you Mount Meron up there, the highest point in Israel. There is a higher point in the Golan Heights, but it's tricky, isn't it? Let's see. Here's an example of the Hills of Galilee, the little mountainous area in northern Israel. Very, very beautiful. Here's the Jordan River. Let me move my pencil out the way. There we go. Make this a little easier to flip through. Some dude having a great time out in the Red Sea. There's Jerusalem. You know, I knew someone in my late teens, and I used to know her through school. I'm not going to get into detail on that, but she went to Jerusalem, and she's Christian. She went to Jerusalem for like a 6-month thing, and then decided she didn't want to come back because she loved the city so much, and she moved there permanently. For all I know, she's still there today. But I thought, like, how interesting that she loved it so much over there. She said it was wonderful, which, like, contradicted all the horrible news I would see on TV, you know. But, you know, like I've said before, there's no bad countries. There's only bad leaders. People are wonderful in general. The Sea of Galilee. And the Dead Sea again. See the people floating. Here's some snow on Mount Meron. It says this is an ancient synagogue. Here's another shot of Tel Aviv at night. That's so pretty, isn't it? It doesn't look real. Some beautiful orchids. Here's an oasis near Jericho. And an acacia tree in the desert. A Nubian ibex, which this one has tiny horns. They get much bigger than that. Caracal. Little wildcat. The Israeli gazelle. Very majestic. A green toad going ribbit ribbit. Hawksbill turtle, which lays its eggs on the Red Sea coast there. These look like donkeys, but apparently they are onagers, which I've never heard of before. They just look like donkeys. Let's see. This is King David being crowned, King of Judah. This is one of the ancient sites up here, Tel Megiddo. And here's a very old Homo sapiens skull that was found. The Assyrians taking over. This is Samaria, it says. Here's the fortress of Masada, which is still a very, very sacred site for the Jewish people. But not so much as this, the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall, where people go to pray against it. They leave little papers with their prayers on it in the cracks of the wall. It's extremely holy. Here's the Crusaders coming in and taking over. Here is Chaim Weissman, a leader of the Zionist movement. He became the first president of Israel. Here's Theodor Herzl, who basically was the one dude to say there should be a Jewish state. There's Hitler. And here are some Jewish people on their way to an extermination camp. So terrible. You know, just an aside, if you're not following the Auschwitz Museum on Twitter, you really should. It's a very powerful Twitter account. A United Nations talk about Palestine. And here's the map that the United Nations proposed. So the yellow would be the Palestinian area. So you can see Gaza, West Bank, and some parts up here. The orange would belong to the Jewish state, so they can have Tel Aviv there. And then Jerusalem would be like a shared area, which the Palestinians turned down. This is David Ben-Gurion, first Prime Minister of Israel. Here's the results of the 6-Day War. So the dark green was before and the light green is after. So you can see they got the whole Sinai Peninsula, the Suez Canal right here, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. 6-Day War happening right there. Here's the peace agreement between Israel and Jordan. We have some Palestinian graffiti against the wall there. Here's Ariel Sharon. Now for some happy pictures. It says it's a Independence Day celebration. Let's see, the Israeli flag. I always like reading this part. It says, the national flag of Israel features a 6-pointed blue Star of David on a white background centered between 2 horizontal blue bands. This was the flag of the Zionist movement, which had adopted the design of the First Zionist Congress in 1897. It was officially adopted on the flag of the State of Israel on October 28, 1948. The Star of David began to be widely used in the 19th century on Jewish religious objects and in synagogues throughout Europe. The star became the symbol of the Zionist movement, although it had no particular religious significance. In time, the star came to signify Judaism to both Jews and non-Jews alike. The 2 blue stripes on the Israeli flag were inspired by the blue stripes of the talit, the traditional prayer shawl worn by Jewish men during religious ceremonies. Some patriotic people. Here's Golda Meir, former Prime Minister of Israel. An Israeli soldier on duty, it says, at the Gaza Strip. I'm not going to get into that. A map of Jerusalem, where you can see the old city over here. And you can see the Christian quarter, Armenian quarter, Jewish quarter, where the Western Wall is. The Muslim quarter with the Temple Mount, Dome of the Rock, and the mosque. Let's see. Some workers working, building a building. Some of the resources of Israel. Cereals, livestock, very agrarian. Here is a water carrier taking water from the Jordan River to irrigate the southern farmlands. Oh, and Israel's home to one of the, I think the largest diamond refineries. You know, it's a quiet night in the city when you can hear the train. My goodness. Solar panels, cool. Here's their currency, the new shekel. Busy Tel Aviv. And the light rail in Jerusalem. This caption says, nearly everyone in Israel has a cell phone. Reading the newspaper. It says these kids are at a bakery, probably hoping to get a little snack. Here are some Ethiopian Jews fleeing to Israel. Population density of Israel. You can see the desert is very sparsely populated. It says these are Sephardim Jews, which means that they are Jews that came from like Asia, Africa, and then Jews coming from Europe are known as Ashkenazi Jews. And of course, there are Muslims living there as well. Some Bedouin farmers and a Bedouin woman. Bedouins being a nomadic tribe. Well, they were nomadic like back in their history, but a very ancient tribe of people. Here is Eliezer ben Yehuda, who resurrected Hebrew and made it a modern language. It says these men are praying at the Western Wall. This boy's having his bar mitzvah, which is the coming of age ceremony in the Jewish religion. Here's an old rabbi and some old guys. It says they're at the Western Wall too, Orthodox Jews. And a very modern looking synagogue. Oh, that's cool. So it's like traditional Judaism. It's like traditional Judaism, modern Judaism. An interesting looking building. This is the Ark that is in every synagogue where the Torah is kept. It says here they're praying during Rosh Hashanah and celebrating Hanukkah. And some Muslim men praying. You can see the Dome of the Rock in the background. It says they're enjoying their Ramadan dinner. Anyway, here's the obligatory part of the book. That's like, what is Islam? So here's a picture of Mecca. And here are some priests. Yeah, at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And here are some Druze men whose religion is kept secret. It's a closed religion. You cannot join unless you're born into it. And the Baha'i shrine. So Israel's not only sacred to Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, it's also sacred to the Baha'i faith as well. This is in Haifa. A modern dance troupe. This is Yehuda Amichai, who was a poet. Emil Habibi is an author. Itzhak Perlman, very famous violinist. And here are some people playing some klezmer music, which, like, the only way I can describe the music is it's the dun 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 music. It's that music. The Eretz Israel Museum, where you can see ancient artifacts such as this, and some modern art as well. Israel School of Art, and people dancing the hora, going dun 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 dun. Anyway, well, it's with Bashir. It's a really good movie. And basketball star Tal Brody, who's from America but decided to move to Israel and play for Israel. Yael Arad, who won the first Olympic medal for Israel. Girl and her grandma. And here's a kibbutz. You can see kind of what it looks like. Little community, their farmland, all working together. School kids and college kids. And a funeral. Oh my gosh. Let's look at the baba ganoush. Traditional food. And falafel. And shawarma, my favorite. And eating is talking about dietary laws here, so you know, it's really interesting how Islam and Judaism's dietary restrictions are kind of similar. But anyway, that's the end of the book. This video's already going pretty long, so I'll just end it here. Thank you so much for watching this video. So far, this was by far the hardest video I've ever had to make. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it relaxing and educational. And I hope you have a very good Good, 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 good.